The policymakers have now been entirely supporting producer innovation, as sort of the Schumpeterian economists would argue, that Schumpeterians would argue that innovation comes from producers. But now that we show that there's this other paradigm, that it does not depend upon intellectual property, then we really have a new model for them to help support as well, to level the playing field. They should help create open standards, they should support things like maker spaces and ways to share innovation. There's a lot that policymakers could do.
Policymakers, I guess, they are not so much aware of this phenomenon because they support and invest a lot in other innovation vehicles like startups or corporate contexts. And I guess it's also interesting for them to consider another option, which is the empowerment of users and collaborative user communities.
You must enable easier cross-border interaction and also transactions. At the same time, I think there are things coming in the past years, like the blockchain and Bitcoin and novel transaction forms that already go across borders where the technology is faster than the policy. So usually policy gives recommendations or looks into the future, but I feel policy in the last years is more regulative. So I think policy can regulate innovation to some degree, but it will not be able to do that across borders unless you coordinate within the European Union. And so this is why it's really important to coordinate on top level on innovation and policy and how you enable entrepreneurship cross borders.
I think there are two ways to think about the role of policymakers in the open and user innovation setting. One is, are there market failures in terms of funding and in terms of diffusion that could potentially be solved for people that are engaging in open and user innovation? If you think about open source software basically now runs the core IT infrastructure of the entire world, but has been very decentralized. But now, because it's become so critical across the world, there's a role for policymakers to come in and say, are the people being funded properly? Is all the effort being done properly, and so forth? So I think there's a funding question and there's a diffusion question, and I think there's still an ongoing debate about intellectual property and how we think about intellectual property and how that can potentially be a catalyst for more innovation instead of it being a hindrance.
When there's now this upcoming trend of mission-oriented policies, social challenges are at the foreground. So then it's rather easy to include the user, the citizen, the people who are in need, instead of the people who like to sell. And in that way, policymakers can link up more easily towards social challenges.
It's a rather new phenomenon in the sense that people don't really understand a lot about it. A lot of theory has stemmed from more classical economic interpretations, and I think that's driven a lot of the policy. For example, how do you drive innovation in an open context where there are seemingly less structure, less hierarchy, less authority? I think from a policy perspective, you need to be able to understand how the process of open and user innovation works in order to do things like stimulate certain types of innovation like you would do in more traditional corporate contexts, things like that.
Normally, when you think about innovations, then innovations are always coming from firms and public agencies that produce these new products and services, and those are also the ones that policies are directed at. So all kinds of subsidies and so on and so forth are directed to firms. Whereas if users innovate, so come up with their own products and services and ideas for that, then they are not really helped out by governments. So I think for governments and policymakers, the one thing to learn is that they at least acknowledge the fact that users do innovate and that they sometimes need some help, not only per se by creating these new products and services, but definitely by also trying to make sure that these good ideas are spread out across, so diffused, so to say, across society.
In the health context, we're hoping that there will be policies created when new healthcare administration systems are created, so that they can have the expectation embedded that patient innovations are important to identify and money should go towards makerspaces in hospitals, and that politicians are campaigning for improvement of the quality of life and welfare of society by investing in health-related or other types of user innovations as a priority, especially as we go forward and are interested in more sustainable, low-cost solutions. The solutions that people develop for themselves in their own context of living tend to be those most effective, sustainable solutions.
Policymakers need to really rethink sort of the political process and the lawmaking process, because you can apply almost any of the tools we have researched in open and user innovation also to the public sector and to the political and lawmaking process, which would mean you democratize also more where ideas are coming from to make lives of citizens better. And that would definitely also create new roles for the politicians and policymakers. And we would also need sort of platforms and ecosystems which actually embrace all these approaches that we have studied for a long time in open and user innovation.